Hey y'all, and welcome back to Booked with the Cook. This week we're continuing our mini-series inspired by Brian Jacques' Redwall. And for this recipe, we're going to start off with a hodgepodge of ingredients. Now you're probably looking at this and thinking, Rachel, that's trash. You're darn right it's trash, but it's also a cheap and delicious source of flavor and nutrients as well. So how do we get at that delicious goodness? Well, I'm going to show you how to turn this trash into your own homemade vegetable stock. Now you may have noticed this little guy hanging out in the background of the potato soup video. That's my scraps bag. It's just a 1-gallon Ziploc bag that I keep in my freezer. Whenever I use veggies that need to be peeled, like carrots, onions, or garlic, I just stick those peels and scraps in the bag. And once it gets full, I just make up some homemade vegetable stock. I find that when you're able to, you should always try to make your own stock. It's shockingly simple, and despite that, you'd be surprised at how much more flavor you can get out of homemade stock than the store-bought stuff. Try to get a variety of veggies before you start. I've got onion, carrot, some garlic skins, and even some mushroom stems in my mix this time. These and a few herbs are all you need to make a simple but fantastic stock. So, without further ado, let's get to cooking. Get out a colander and give all the scraps a good wash. Let them drain for a few minutes while we go to the stove. First, pour a bit of olive oil in the bottom of a large stock pot. Get it hot and shimmering, and then toss in all of your washed scraps. Then, toss in a small amount of peppercorns, about 5 sprigs of fresh thyme, and a couple of bay leaves. Now, you can pretty much flavor your stock with any sort of herbs you want, but I just happen to really like this combo. Don't have the fresh stuff? Don't sweat it. You can always use dry spices if you need to. Then let your scraps and your herbs sizzle in the oil until they begin to smell really good. It doesn't take very long, only about 45 seconds to a minute. Next, we're going to add our water. I use just enough to cover the scraps plus an inch or two. For a gallon bag of scraps, that usually rounds out to about 8 cups or so. Bring to a boil over high heat, then reduce the temperature down to low and let it simmer for just about 30 minutes. Then go ahead and remove the bay leaves and the thyme. This sounds weird, but vegetable stocks can easily become very bitter, and the woody stems of the thyme can be a source of that bitterness if you're not careful. At this point, you might be thinking, just 30 minutes? That seems like a really short amount of time. Don't stocks usually take hours to cook? The answer is yes if you're doing a meat or a bone-based stock. But here's the thing about Redwall. It's a medieval fantasy in which most of the characters are obligate herbivores. That means 2 things. Number 1, it's the medieval era. You use everything you have, scraps and all, to get as much food as you can. And number 2, nearly every dish in Redwall falls into one of 3 dietary categories: vegan, vegetarian, or pescatarian. During the cooking time, give your stock a taste. Mine is still a bit on the bitter side, but with the addition of a touch of salt, it balances out just fine. Bitterness can be par for the course for scrap-based broths, whether it be from my scraps being frozen for a long period of time, or sometimes it's just the components of the scraps themselves, like the soil they were grown in. But despite this, the stock is actually very good for you. And if you're using stronger flavors, like curry for example, that bitterness can actually add to the flavor profile of whatever you're cooking. I really like using this stock for my French onion soup recipe, so let me know in the comments down below if you'd like me to make that one in a future video. Now that our stock has simmered for about 30 minutes, we're going to take it and put it in a jar. You can also put it in a Ziploc bag or freeze it in small chunks in an ice tray for up to 3 months. But I don't recommend putting the jar in the freezer. That's a bad idea. The glass will break. In the jar, in the fridge, your stock will actually last you probably about a week to a week and a half. Now, to get the best quality stock, we'll need to strain it through a cheesecloth. If you don't have any cheesecloth on hand, that's okay. I'll bet you have some coffee filters, which will work just fine in this case. This will collect any particles that might cause the broth to become more bitter by steeping over time. And with that, your stock is ready to use. 1 gallon of veggies will yield roughly 8 cups of stock, perfect for all your soup and sauce needs. Well, that's it for this episode, y'all. Join us next time when I use this stock to make a Redwall classic, shrimp and hot root soup. Until then, y'all take care and be safe.